Kia ora. Just going to talk about my Penguin books for a second. So, these are the Penguin editions that I own. There are a couple other ones, like the orange Penguin ones, that aren't on the shelf, but I'm just going to talk about the books on the shelf. So, the black spined ones are the classics. So they're generally the older texts that are somewhat timeless and are often translated from other languages. And then there's the modern classics, which are mostly 20th century books that are in the Penguin catalogue and are similar to the classics, but in the sense that they mostly deal with modern themes and modern authors, or they entirely deal with modern themes and modern authors. Some of the Penguin Modern Classics also have Penguin Classic versions, but some of them do not. So, yeah. And now there's also the cloth-bound ones. So I quite like the cloth-bound ones, but the texture, the rubber on the cover comes off with exposure, so they can look a bit worn, but then generally I find them quite enjoyable to read. So we'll start off with a bit of philosophy with Beyond Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche. This is a Penguin book, but it's not in the typical Penguin book format, so I guess it's a bit of a standalone one. So this is a piece of philosophical criticism by Friedrich Nietzsche, and it's quite a good read, but he uses a lot more technical terms in this book than in his other works, and I've got a few other works here. So this is more like his critique of his contemporaries, more or less, among other things. And then I have Inferno by Dante. So this is 14th century 14th century epic poem in Italian. This does contain the dual text, so it contains the Italian poetry on one page, and then mirrored on the other page is the English translation. I think it's quite a good book. It's not for everyone, but it is it is a very integral piece into pop culture, especially in references. Yeah, it's referenced quite heavily, and also it fits into the classical canon as well as the sort of a pre-Renaissance text. So it's quite influential. And then we have the Brothers Karamazov. I'm not 100% sure how you pronounce that, by Fyodor Dostoevsky. So this is essentially Dostoevsky's book about... It's a novel, and it's a bit of a mystery, sort of crime mystery, but also a dense Russian novel, in the sense that it has like 1 million characters and there's a lot going on in it, and characters have a lot of names. It's Dostoevsky's take on religion and atheism. So the man believed in God, but he presents some compelling atheistic arguments in this novel, and this is sort of his grappling with those ideas, and it's quite good. I haven't finished it, but it's a novel that I plan on finishing at some point. Then we have a couple of Penguin Archive books. So we have Chess by Stefan Zweig. Don't really want to talk too much about this, other than I really, really like chess. Less the game, but more the novel. It's a good book. And then we have another Friedrich Nietzsche. This is Ecce Homo, which is the last thing that Friedrich Nietzsche wrote before his psychotic break, ending his career. And you can tell he's basically on the verge of psychosis when you read this, knowing a bit of history about him. It's essentially just an examination of all of Nietzsche's works and him talking about them and talking about, I don't know, he just talks about a lot of stuff and is a bit of a yapper. Then we're on to the Penguin Classics. So first up we have Works and Days by Hesiod. So this is essentially ancient Greek poetry, talking about the creation of the gods. It's a bit of an origin story, and it's approximately as old as the Iliad and the Odyssey. If you want an idea of like how old this is, this definitely predates the Socratic philosophers, and it's integral to Greek mythology. And then we have a translation of Beowulf, verse translation. Beowulf is basically an epic poem in Old English about the hero Beowulf and his various feats. And it is sort of like a quasi-historical document, in that it details some of the Danish clans that went to England, but also it's a bit of a mythological text, and it's very influential on J.R.R. Tolkien, especially with The Hobbit. There's a lot of parallel themes, and J.R.R. Tolkien also did a translation. From what I gather, the J.R.R. Tolkien translation is not considered a good translation by contemporary standards. He did it quite early in his career, but it is very insightful into Tolkien as a writer. This is not the Tolkien translation. This is a different translation. Basically all of these books I think are good. This one is quite good. And then we have Inferno again. And then we have Purgatorio, which is essentially the sequel to Inferno. So basically, Dante goes to hell, then he goes to purgatory, and then he goes to paradise, or paradiso. And these three books are considered the Divine Comedy. So, contrary to popular belief, Inferno is not a standalone. It's actually just a part of the full body of work, which is called Divine Comedy. They're often separated into books because they separate quite nicely and have their own names and everything. But these three books are essentially one book. The poem's like decently long, but it's not that long. Most of these three books are the original text and the poem, so it's double the length. And then there's a lengthy commentary and introduction, which the Robin Kirkpatrick introductions and commentary are very, very good if you're really wanting to dig deep into the text, and the good translations of the text as well. But if you really want to like dig deep and do a deep dive into the Divine Comedy, definitely read the commentary and the introduction in these books. That's what takes up most of the space. Then we have Faust Part 1 and Faust Part 2. So this is by Wolfgang von Goethe. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. So he's a famous German writer and botanist and politician from, I think, the 1800s. 1700s. He's from a while back, and this is, by many account, like, I think it says in the introduction, but it's often considered the last epic poetry, sort of the last of that kind of canon of works, and then also the first sort of, or one of the early modern, like, classics. It's very much in line with stuff like Dante and the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Aeneid. It's very, and Paradise Lost. It's very much in that kind of ballpark of epic poetry, but it is it's a lot more, well, it's not modern, because modern's like a specific period, but it feels a lot more modern than those other works. And also it's written in obviously it's written in verse, because I was talking about poetry, but it's also written as a play, and Goethe was very influenced by Shakespeare, so there. Then we have 3 Gothic novels. Nothing really to talk about this. I think this contains Frankenstein and 2 other ones. And I basically just picked this up at a used book sale for very cheap, so that's why that's there. Then we've got another book sale book, Gulliver's Travels. So Gulliver's Travels is by Jonathan Swift. It's another 18th century book, and it's a bit of like a travelogue, like a fantasy travelogue style thing. It's quite influential in pop culture. It's very influential on One Piece, in particular. And yeah. Then we have the Metamorphosis and Other Stories by Franz Kafka. So Franz Kafka is one of the greats. You really, when you read his work, you begin to understand that this guy is like really, really good, even by like classic novel standards. And I imagine that reading him in the German would just be just an incredible read. From what I gather, reading the introduction and talking to other people watching videos about Franz Kafka, is his works struggle a bit in translation because of how he used German in a very precise manner to convey ideas, and the tone of the original work is very like, it's almost casual but also very business-like, and that doesn't always get captured in translations, but this is a good translation. Then we have some more philosophy with Republic by Plato. So Plato, Greek philosopher, he didn't get taught by Socrates, but he was highly, highly influenced by Socrates and listened to Socrates talk, and Socrates is a key figure in Republic. This is basically it's a piece of ancient philosophy about the ideal society, and it's got the allegory of the cave, very, very famous allegory in this one. And it's, if you're serious in philosophy, you kind of have to grapple with Plato at some point. Then we've got the Prose Edda. So this is essentially a primary text for Norse mythology. So the Prose Edda, and there's also the Poetic Edda. Those two works essentially make up the extant portion of Norse mythology that we have. And basically all Norse mythology things are based on those two texts. So, yeah. And a few other, epic sagas. But this is very much like a detailed map of Norse mythology, written quite a long time ago. I don't exactly remember when, but it was written around just after Iceland was converted to Christianity, and Snorri, whatever his last name is, he wrote down the Icelandic myths and preserved them for posterity, and fortunately they got preserved, and this work got transmitted in Icelandic, so we still have it. So it's a big part of Icelandic mythology. And then we have the first part of Remembrance of Things Past. So this is essentially a translation of the In Search of Lost Time, or La Recherche du Temps Perdu, which is a classic of French. And this is a specific English translation that is considered a classic within its own right. So this changes a bit of the original text, but this translation is considered like a classic work of literature by itself. So I think I will finish reading this, and then when I complete the Remembrance of Things Past, I might read In Search of Lost Time, so with a more, I guess, a faithful translation. But it's not to say that this is not a bad translation, it's a very good translation. It's just there's poetic devices that are included, and poetic allegories and analogies that are included in this. Allegories? And just maybe allusions is the word I'm looking for. That are not present in the original. In particular, the title is a reference to Shakespeare, which is not the case in the original French. And this is a very, very long novel. It's in 3 volumes, all sort of 1,000-page kind of length. And it's essentially a meditation on the passage of time. So, yeah. And then we have Soseki's, Natsumi Soseki's Kokoro. So this is a classic of Japanese, and very beautiful and intriguing look into Japanese culture by one of the quintessential Japanese authors. And this is very beautiful and haunting, and is about a teacher and a student, although the teacher goes by the name sensei, which carries very different connotations to the word teacher in English. And in a sense, this sensei character is not a teacher as we would see him in, or as we would understand that word in English. So I think it's more accurate to say there's a sensei character and a young man who looks up to the sensei. And then we have Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which I've read quite a few times. I think this is a good one to just kind of like delve into. It's got some pretty intense and deep philosophy, but in essence it's sort of like a kind of like an epic sort of like a almost like a bit of a religious text. I mean, the allusions to Zarathustra and Zoroastrianism are quite prevalent throughout it, and it kind of is set in time of antiquity, and it is in a large part like the summation of Nietzsche's philosophy, but this book can just be appreciated also as a work of art, and it's just a good text to sort of sink your teeth into and digest slowly, and you don't need to try to understand it or be some kind of philosophy bro or anything. It's a bit of a spiritual meditation on life, and it's very symbolic as well. So that ends the classics, and then on to the modern classics. So we have Finnegan's Wake, which is my favourite book of all time. This book is almost incomprehensible, but I think it is like a perfect encapsulation of the totality of language as much as you can condense it down into a single book. And it's a book that when you read it, you're kind of just learning a foreign language that is hyper complicated, but also very syntactically similar to English. It is written in its own unique polyglot language, which is primarily English, but there are about 60 recognized languages that are fused into this, and it follows mostly English syntax, but will break away from that for various effects. And this book is mostly considered to be a depiction of a dream or dreams, but it is so much more than that. It is really like a book that is like a key that unlocks your mind in a very mind-expanding way that no other piece of literature is anywhere near like. The only thing similar is stuff like Ulysses and Gravity's Rainbow and Infinite Jest, and even then they're only very superficially similar. This book is insanely complicated, but also the trick to reading it is just to read the words and just continue reading, and then when you get to the end, to loop back and then read it again. And sometimes you might follow the paper trail of a particular word and try to understand it on like a structural level, but I find it's best to just let the language of this book wash over you. There are also audiobooks of it, and versions of people reading it out loud. I recommend when you're really getting into it to look into the audiobook versions of this, but it's definitely a different thing to read it because there are so many puns and multi-layered illusions that you would just miss by hearing the text spoken out loud, but also you would miss by reading it silently. So there's that. And then we have Italo Calvino. This is a book of essays. I'm going to pause. So we have Italo Calvino, collected nonfiction, the written word and the unwritten word. So this is essentially just a bunch of articles and essays that Calvino wrote. He's a famous Italian writer. He's, I believe, quite influential in Italy, but is beginning to gain recognition outside of that, especially for If on a Winter's Day a Traveller. And he has a very wide-ranging knowledge of things and talks about many things and is very acutely aware of what was happening in Italy in the 60s and 70s in terms of literary and scientific discoveries. He explores a lot of different books and a lot of different pieces of text in scientific discoveries, but also literary. So yeah, and then we have more nonfiction. So we have Ethics by Michel Foucault. So Michel Foucault was a French philosopher who did a lot of historical critiques on the philosophy of history, and also wrote a lot about power dynamics and just on a bunch of various topics. And this is his book on ethics. He's a very interesting writer. His prose can be quite dense to get into, but I feel like you're really scratching some fundamental ideas with his work. Then we have The Age of Reason. So Jean-Paul Sartre, The Age of Reason. This is also by a French philosopher, an existentialist philosopher, but this is a novel. So this novel explores existential philosophy ideas, but is not a philosophy text per se. And lastly, we have another Soseki, Botchan. We have Ulysses Unbound, which is non-fiction writing, essentially it's a companion book to the novel Ulysses by James Joyce. And then lastly, we have A Picture of Dorian Gray. And my legs are starting to cramp up, so I am going to stop here. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.